Hello, everybody. My name is Edward Tse. I'm with Gaofeng Advisory Company. We are a strategy and management consulting firms with roots in China. Today, I'm very, very delighted to have a good friend of mine, somebody that I've known for more than 30 years. He is Osman Ghani. Osman and I went to McKinsey and Company when we were very young. We're much younger than we are today. Uh, I joined the McKinsey and Company in the San Francisco office, while Usman joined the firm in the Cleveland office. But we met at firm events and so on, so we got to know each other since then. After that, Usman has gone on to achieve a very illustrious career in consulting, even though he changed from McKinsey to other capacities. After 30 odd years, with incredible amount of experience and tremendous insight, I find Usman to be able to offer insights to many of our clients in a very unique manner. So Usman, since we left McKinsey, what have you been doing?
Well, thank you very much, firstly, to invite me. It's an honor, Dr. Say. Your work has been outstanding, and our association way back when was tremendous. I think we learned a lot from each other, but I think your contributions are really praiseworthy, particularly what you're doing in China and in the Far East. I have been working more on what I call futuristic consulting. And by that I mean, Dr. Say, that typical consulting organizations go into the verticals or the horizontals. They go into vertical silos like, production, operations, HR or talent, and finance, etc. Or they go across processes like quote to cash and talent recruitment, etc. What I am seeing is, as an organization, the right metaphor is as a whole entity, as a whole being. And therefore my emphasis over the last 20 plus years has been on researching and finding success stories and theories that can make integration happen, because that gives more synergy and far more potential than companies tend to realize. And so what we have found, I was inspired by Peter Drucker, and in his last book, my chapter on the leader integrator was published, which was, of course, we were disappointed that there were not many integrators at the top level. They were all looking at, their favorite function, typically revenue generation, but the rest of the organization wasn't. So there was a potential. And what I developed then was the Segomo methodology. We can talk about it a little bit later, that brings together these. Now then after that, we also started looking at across companies in terms of joint ventures and alliances or mergers. I mean, the typical classical merger is done just by looking at the left side of the balance sheet, and the right side is often forgotten because that is dynamic. And this brings us to our mutual field. You are well aware from your very good MIT education of system dynamics, which we also call business dynamics. And I was a part of the group at MIT and taught that for a semester as well. So that looking at the dynamics of how things flow and what kind of scenarios you should or shouldn't accommodate, what kind of intuitive and counterintuitive insights will come out of the simulation, which is feedback-based simulation and not optimization. That is what I then went into. So there are various layers of integration, which is what I have been developing, and clients on 6 continents have been very happy, except that, I would love to do that more with you in Asia, and you with me here in the United States.
Fantastic. That's a very valid, very, very comprehensive summary of what you've done. I know that you've served some really prestigious clients over the years, right? I think you did some work with Hewlett Packard.
Yes.
Did some work with ExxonMobil? Perhaps you can tell me a little bit about your client base over the years.
Yes. The EDS, as it was called at that time,
Yeah.
I was with them for a couple of years as their senior vice president of marketing. We were looking at the world, and it was acquired by Hewlett Packard. And I felt at that time that EDS hasn't really lived up to the mark that was developed at that point in time. So that was a short spell of trying to, after McKinsey, again get the sense of how a real P&L, profit and loss responsibility, works. As you know, and before MIT, I was working for Exxon and Shell. There also, I had P&L responsibility, and I think that consulting alone doesn't really work if you're a pure consultant unless you have put your hands and gloves into actual work as a corporate executive. So that gave me that, latest and greatest feeling. And why EDS? Because it was the IT provider of all sorts, the entire realm. From A to Z. Anything that you wanted as a solution, EDS had it. So that was my short period there. Question on the leader integrator, Dr. Say, what inspired me to write that? I was at that time under the tutelage of Peter Drucker. This is many years after having left the firm. And what I was doing was looking for CEOs who brought the integration possible. And there were people like Lou Gerstner who were insisting on it. And then there were those who were not. So I went around, we did a survey of about 500 CEOs worldwide, but mostly in the West. And we found, using the Pareto principle, that about 20% of the CEOs did emphasize on integration, and I call leader integrators. They were not emphasizing one or the other. They were trying to take all functions and all processes together.
Usman, you also authored Meeting Metaphors, which is published in the Leadership magazine. Why is metaphor important for leaders?
Thank you. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And in my opinion, a metaphor is worth 1,000 pictures. I'll tell you why. A picture is a snapshot, but a metaphor gives a more dynamic, moving picture. So, for example, if you talk about people crossing the bridge or handshaking with each other from across the divides, it clearly creates a movie in your mind, and you persevere for that. Similarly, if somebody says about reaching a goal with excellence, obviously you are imagining some movement over there. So I did research. I was observing the meetings of, I think, over 1,100 meetings of boards and CEOs over a 12-year period. And I saw some meetings in the boards and top management teams were successful and some were failures. So I looked at their agenda. They were all following the agenda. They all were punctual and all those nice things that are typically in traditional meeting management books were going on, but something else was going on. And I found that what was going on and what I've written about, there are almost 450 pages of research. It's coming out in a book now. My challenge is to reduce it down to 250 pages because otherwise publishers, don't like thick books to make it into a bestseller. What I found was that those CEOs, board members, and executives who were able to understand that there is a metaphor going around that is defeating them, they were able to identify that and replace it with another metaphor and then build their thinking around that. It changed the framework. And that became a more successful meeting and people left happily. And so it was published in the Leadership Journal. And there are 8 sets of metaphors. Actually, the 9th is a systems metaphor, which I have identified. And I've also picked up keywords that once you are listening to a meeting, even if you are not physically there, you are on a Zoom. In a meeting, executives are coming up with emotions. They are coming up with thoughts. They are coming up with all kinds of processes. And in that process, they are giving words. Those words reflect, underlying those words are metaphors or pictures in their minds. And sometimes those pictures are actually not jiving in, but conflicting. And so one thing is to be able to identify those metaphors and say, is this appropriate here? For example, is sports metaphor a good one to achieve a goal? Yes, because a goal is. But is sports metaphor good for doing hospital surgery? No. And it's not you can use team, but not sports. So like that, I identified these various metaphors and comprehensively researched and then revised it. And that is where, and then of course, the Leadership Journal published it. I believe that McKinsey Quarterly or the McKinsey Journal now wants to also print what are the 9 metaphors, where to use them. The idea is how to condense it. That is my challenge. So that is another publication over the last some years that I was able to contribute.
Is this skill, can this skill can be learned by executives, or is that really innate to a person?
What I found was that those who had it innate, Dr. Say, were successful. So now the question is, how do you take that to those for whom it's not innate? And that's a developmental thing. And that goes in 3 steps. First is talking about doing a training program on what are these and why, and giving case studies of where they were failures or successful. Secondly, is for them to write their own metaphors or to be able to record themselves at their own and see what they're saying, because that is coming from the bottom of their minds or hearts. And then the third is to become conscious. Actually, there is a entire template that I have developed where I see the trajectory of changing metaphors. And that is very powerful. They say, we were in this metaphor, now we are here. This makes sense. And if a metaphor is worth 1,000 pictures and it's moving and dynamic and integrative, wow, voila, then your meeting is far more successful, more powerful, and gives you a lot more ethos to work with.
Is this skill also a function of the cultural background of the executive and also the corporate DNA of the company itself?
Yes, very good question. Very few people have asked this question. Dr. Say, the thing is, where do these come from and how do you get socialized with them? And you are now touching the question of company culture. And as you know, I'm a student of Professor Edgar Schein, and he is Mr. or the guru of organization development. So, and I sat and spent time with him, wrote a paper for him. And what we came up with is that maybe the right way is not to begin in meetings of executives or boards, but to go around and see the culture of the organization, then distill from there what we feel are the metaphors or the metaphor prevailing, and should that continue or not. So you can start from the macro, which is the culture, or micro, which is the meeting. Either way you could start. But to be honest with you, what Dr. Schein or Professor Schein has said about culture is extremely powerful. It takes more time to go around in an organization like an anthropologist to ferret out and to filter out what the culture is, vis-a-vis if you were sitting on 2 or 3 board meetings or 2 or 3 executive meetings in 1 week, then you could quickly figure out at least what the top team culture is. So it depends upon how much time the client has available, the company has the patience for, and then you could do either way.
So the exercise is both analytical and also non-analytical, because some of this can be addressed by, really just talking about it, but some of it has to do with a very deep appreciation of the cultural aspect and also the organizational aspect and so on. So it requires a lot of skills to orchestrate this kind of overall awareness in a company as well as capabilities building, isn't it? Is that in a way, is that a key part of what you do?
Yes. So Dr. Say, first of all, I must say, I have always been proud of our friendship, but you're so smart. This very few questions people have asked about relating it all the way across the organization. Is it only a top team problem or a culture problem? And you knew, I think, instinctively that it's ingrained in the corporate culture. Now, coming to your specific question, this is something I do when companies invite me to, but I don't voluntarily go around. If I'm doing an assignment on Segomo, my aim is not to start to sell other wares or other things and give other books and chapters of mine to them. My aim then is to focus on that. But it's a very important thing to do for the companies who will value it. Those who don't believe in metaphors, or that metaphors have power behind them, or that they entertain them in their minds and across a board, they may be conflicting metaphors. Those who don't believe that, why would one want to, try to school them unnecessarily? But those who would buy into it quickly, they say, yes, come on in, tell us, help us out here. And it's not a lot of consultees that I have to do. There is, as I said, a couple of templates where initially when I have shared with them what the theory is, they can then do this all on their own. Absolutely. There is no dependency on me to go and teach them every time and to be there. This template and how things migrate and move is the answer for them.
Is this subject connected to how you were profiled or featured in the I think it's the 2021 book Strategic Management, which was published by McGraw Hill? Is that related to that, or is that did you talk about something different in that book?
Okay, so this book,
Right.
McGraw Hill's book, this is, pretty hefty thing. What they have done is honored me in the 3 or 4 pages of my interview with my book and all. Every time they come up with a new version, every 5 years, they include somebody who they believe has done well in strategic management. So I'm honored. My emphasis there is, Dr. Say, on what we as management hide, which is mistakes. And I tell people what Apple has learned over the years. And so this is not my theory, it's a theory of successful CEOs who have rapid cycles of product innovation.
Right.
What they learn is that mistakes are part of everyday activity and should not be penalized. And so you learn from them. And what I was able to do is find a ratio between successes and failures or mistakes. And mostly people, actually, those who don't dismiss the mistakes and build on them, come to success. Because this is, again, an attitude thing. Is a mistake or is a flop an opportunity to learn, or is it an opportunity to reprimand and put it under the rug, which is what, unfortunately, in our Western cultures, we do a lot, because people are afraid of being fired. In more holistic cultures, more familial cultures like the East, where people don't easily fire anybody, they understand that these were honest mistakes and they reward, in fact. And, in Apple, Steve Jobs used to do a wonderful job. He used to say, okay, all the mistakes you have made are there. I've made many in life. Next was one example. Now let's uncover them and solve them ourselves, because if we don't, competitors will catch it and they will do it. And thus the rapid innovation every year of the iPhone, the iPod, and iPad, and all that. So I think what I'm emphasizing is strategic management is I am going further than what there's a whole concept of evolved strategy versus deliberate strategy. What you plan in the beginning of a strategy, it doesn't necessarily come true. Along the way, you disregard some of the stuff because you have learned some new things. Emergent strategy comes in, and then the executed strategy is a combination of emergent and plan. So what I'm saying is, if you know that is the process of strategy, then obviously you will be dropping off a few things, and why not your mistakes there? And, one of my careers, I was a programmer. And, I worked in IBM System 3600 and all those, 4331. And I knew we had a compiler. So each time I would code, it would come back with the errors. And nobody knew, but I would go and correct those errors. And there was a legend at the bottom as to what those errors were, the codes. And no one program anybody writes the first time runs or runs successfully. So what I learned pretty quickly in my career in IT, that if you have to revise that, why don't you revisit your ideas and your decisions and do them rapidly? So more feedback and more quick turnaround. And that is where what I have emphasized here, that the professors who years ago said that, the strategy is not the planned strategy, but the emergent plus planned. Let's see what happens in that part where you discard some and you pick up new ideas. I'll give you one example. There is a CEO I know who actually is of a cement company, a concrete company, actually. And these days, we have made a lot of money in the concrete industry because a lot of construction in the Dallas-Fort Worth area has gone on. The demand for all kinds of construction equipment, and even cement has gone up. And so the CEO and I were talking, and he said, you know what, we have been making these mistakes, but nobody knows. And now I need to fix them. I said, you're right, because if you don't correct them in this small scale, you'll repeat them on the larger scale. And if you repeat them on the larger scale, guess what? You lose the market share and you lose the revenue. Your competitor comes in because there's no forgiving when the growth is so fast as it is happening in DFW metropolis. So he looked at it and he said, you know, gentlemen, let's sit down. And there were a couple of ladies, they said, gentlemen, let's sit down and look at why we have failed in the past. Where have we not been able to supply? What he went through everything from the constitution of the cement all the way to the delivery, the partnership. And there were so many errors that people were keeping quiet about because they were afraid, or they were so small that they had not been magnified. Now, when the orders grew up, hey, you know, you didn't want to magnify those things, you wanted to improve. So it was a very good opportunity for them to reflect, relearn, and then after the pause, go ahead full swing, and they're doing very well.
That's very impressive. And the concept about the dynamic strategy was really very insightful. And if we have a chance later, in the future, we can put more into that, because I think a lot of companies will benefit from that kind of framework. But I'd like to turn to.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is Henry Mintzberg's work.
Right.
He's talking about, you know, the strategy you start, intended strategy, emergent, unrealized, and realized. So this is what inspired me. And when I knew that this is coming in the first chapter, and when they invited me for interview, that's why I talked more about mistakes, more about learning, and more about triumphing from fast cycle times of innovation.
Fantastic. That's really good thoughts. You also mentioned about the Sycamore framework or methodology a few times already. Could you elaborate that for our clients? What is that?
All right. So I don't want to offend anybody, but people think that if they have a strategy, everything will be fine. They are partly correct. The supremacy or the primacy of strategy is in question. Why? Because a lot of the companies today work together. No company can do it alone. There are partnerships, there are mergers and acquisitions, there are joint ventures, there are alliances, and so forth. And the supply chain is full of all kinds of, and if anything, the pandemic has taught us is that, you know, dependence on multiple supply chains, which we call multi-firm supply chain, is much better than a single tight supply chain. So in Sycamore, S stands for strategy, I stands for innovation, G is for governance, which is absolutely important. And governance is of all the processes within, it's not just the corporate governance or the business governance at the board level. The first O is organization, which is the structure, the culture. Then M is marketing, and finally operations. So what I'm saying there is you have to take these 6 and look at them together. And this goes back to my concept of integration. You could get some very good ideas in operations, but if the strategy hasn't got it in there, are you going to wait for the next cycle of strategy, 5 years, 2 years, depending on the cycle time of the industry, or will you be able to make the innovation then? Similarly, innovation, there are consultants upon consultants who say we focus on and specialize on innovation. I don't think that, any innovation can succeed unless there's a strategy, unless it is marketed, unless it has governance around it, and unless its operations smoothly deliver. So many patents pending out there, how they are not succeeding. Innovations and inventions are a lot these days. So there's this complementary and supplementary role, complementing and supplementing role of these 6, which again goes into the dynamic world. And at the first level, we do an assessment, which opens the minds and eyes of companies as to what they need to do to collect it together, to be able to get the synergy and to be able to have the confluence. And that is why, my firm is called Conflu Core, because it's the confluence at the core. And these are the core 6 areas. So sometimes strategy takes primacy, sometimes innovation. And so I'm trying to have this hexagon.
Sure.
Thing in my mind related here. So we tried this with a very large Saudi organization, which was getting into merger or acquiring rather Merger is of equals. Acquisition is, a father and a daughter, like, that kind of a situation. It was not a merger, and we told them this is an acquisition. Let's call it what a spade is spade. And then we looked at the strategies of the two, the innovations of the two, the governance of the two, and we found many disparities. And then we said that, here should be the conditions for mergers and acquisitions for you guys going forward. And that's how they benefited a lot. Here, one of the sports companies, who are absolutely successful, they call themselves a service company. We did a lot of system dynamics modeling with them in terms of what would be the optimal growth rate for them, because they all wanted to shoot beyond the wall. And sometimes it is worthwhile when the market allows you, but sometimes you have to be very calculated, thoughtful, deliberated, and considered. And that's where we come in. For those kind of things to be able to consider, to deliberate, there should be certain frameworks beyond what traditional consulting offers. And that's what we do.
Right, that's fantastic. I think this is a very powerful framework and methodology. And I was wondering to what extent this framework or methodology can be applicable to companies here in Asia. You know the Eastern culture very well as well. For example, we serve a lot of Chinese companies, and many of them are growing very fast, and they really many of them went from almost nowhere to very sizable in a short period of time. In this kind of context, and also against the backdrop of a very Asian culture, how would you, or do you need to adjust the Sycamore approach to help these sort of companies?
Okay. Yes, I have spent some time in Asia. I originally hail from there, and Asia is huge. I'm glad you mentioned China and some of the Far East countries. I am actually impressed that the Chinese companies that I know of a little bit, and that I've been able to read English versions of their strategies and their reports, are quite thoughtful, actually. They are not rushing for growth the way we do here in the US, more than anywhere else. And growth is not God for them, but more so the customer satisfaction, the relationship development with the market, and then growing accordingly. They think far, they think much farther, which we in America used to do. I mean, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the Bob Blake, Jane Mouton innovations, Drucker's work, and Henry Mintzberg's work, all those things made us great what we were. But today, so many of our US companies want to rush and show growth regardless of whatever. GE is a classical example of trying to go after growth when there was really none, or manufacturing growth on paper and then failing.
Many of the clients or companies in China, or for that matter, other parts of Asia, will really want to understand your philosophy as well as your specific methodology in Sycamore, because I think many companies would need that kind of advice. I've taken a lot of your time, Usman. I appreciate very, very much. So I would jump to perhaps the last question. Last question is really related to consulting. I started by saying that both of us started at McKinsey well over 30 years ago. It's been a long time. The world has changed a lot since then. Consulting has also evolved a great deal. I certainly have been working in consulting all along. I've also changed a couple of different firms. I'm running my own firm now. And you also have done similar things. So from your perspective, with the vast amount of experience and exposure that you have had, plus the geographic diversity, like I know that you have consulted to people or companies in 6 continents. Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
So if you take a step back and look at your career and how the world evolved and the role of consulting during this process, how would you sort of, in a way, tell the younger people who are interested in getting into consulting or already practicing consulting, what would be the advice that you like to give them?
Yeah. This is an evolution question, maybe a revolution question. See, Dr. Say, first of all, I think what you've done is an example of what you should be telling them, which is to step aside, think afresh, don't get stuck into any one framework, keep developing, and think dynamically, because the real world is dynamic, it's not static. The static frameworks of yesteryears, they are good for a snapshot, but they're not good for a movie, for the future. Um, as I look right now, I by far, our alma mater, McKinsey, is by far one of the best firms, if not the best, when it comes to fact-based or database factual analysis on a fast turn basis. But and of course, they have divided themselves up into so many practices. I don't know how many there are. In my days, there were 60 some, but now I believe they are in hundreds, which I'm not sure is necessarily a good service to the clients. What I would like to suggest to young fellows coming in, as well as to our alma mater, McKinsey, and any other consulting company that cares, is to start thinking about dynamics. 21st century is going to be about dynamic models. You and I have done system dynamics, so you appreciate, and I see you are nodding, you know what I'm talking about. But some people
Yes.
don't know what they don't know, or they discard it because it is difficult. And that reminds me of when, I was in high school and learning calculus. I enjoyed it actually, and that's partly why I went into engineering. But many of my class fellows thought, oh God, the hype of the calculus was so difficult. But once you have learned it, it becomes easy. And so it is that threshold. Some people cross it, some don't. Many of my class fellows didn't go into engineering. They went into medical sciences because they didn't want calculus. They had a choice. Will they ever realize, what incremental development in the human body takes place through calculus? I don't know. So the advice would be twofold. One, to our good firm, look at dynamics, look at system dynamics, and that can give you a lot of edge. It did give it to them when we started there, but then, after the dot-com boom and half the firm was moving towards the West Coast, we lost a lot of momentum. Secondly, to the young fellows, I would say, question the frameworks and contrast them with the reality going on, so you can create the gap, something which is in the gap. And most likely in the 21st, learn more about business dynamics modeling rather than static modeling more. Pick up the most difficult reports that there are, question them, because very quickly they become easy. After, when 90% people give it up, you pick it up and you make it into a successful venture for yourself. And that, to me, is the essence of consulting, that you co-create with your client. It's not just that you are the giver and they are the taker. Their problems, their issues, their challenges, their desires help extend us and tell us what they're thinking that we don't know. And you can co-create. And I mean, the firm at one time used to write these case studies and articles. Not much going on these days. There's a lot of those crossword puzzles and all that stuff that comes, which is, I'm sure, I'm not, why McKinsey has gone into that business of crossword puzzles, I don't know. But anyway, young people should know that it is not just like in our days, they used to go to McKinsey, BCG, Bain, Booz Allen, and a couple others to get a 2-year on their resume and then move on. You and I didn't go for that. We went for real consulting to learn, to give. And then we realized that we had outgrown, and that's where we are. So to the young people, don't just use it as a springboard. Use it as a learning platform, both for the firm, for you, and for the better of the client.
That's really good advice and insight, Osman. I think that for me, the biggest thing I got out from McKinsey was that all the advice and wisdom from Marvin Dow. I think you remember Marvin.
Yes.
He has retired by the time when we joined the firm, but he was still quite active around the firm.
Yes,
and
yes.
Going to different training events and different offices, and really counsel at that time young people like us. And the one thing that really impressed me and still is very much in in what I do is that he kept on emphasizing that consulting was not a business. Consulting
Yeah.
should be a profession. And it was, to me, coming from Asia and a very different background, and I was an engineer before. Nobody told me that actually, but Marvin opened up my eyes, and of course I didn't quite understand what he was talking about. But the more I spend time in consulting and having to change different firms, and the more I recognize how central this kind of thought process is in guiding the behavior of each one of us who still practice consulting today, and including the young people actually. But I'm not sure, after some 30 odd years now, whether or not bigger firms in consulting, they still talk about this kind of values or not. I'm not sure. But the last question, Usman, if people want to find you, right? I know that you're based in Texas, USA.
Yes.
But if people want to find you, how can people find you actually?
Care of Dr. Edward Say. I would, let's talk about, because there are so many complementary and supplementary things we can do together in Asia. I think, you know better than I do. My visits there are few and far between. In the US, people know me, and the email, and these days Zoom is working. After the pandemic, people have become used to it. But you feel free on your website to give my email address or my phone, whatever is appropriate to your culture and your protocol. I'm happy to, and just give me a call. And, we can always do some good things together. Two brains are better than one. I believe in that.
So people can go on the website.
To your other
up your
point
name.
about what.
Yeah, people can
Yes,
go on
sure.
the website and look at your name and try to contact you directly through your website, right?
Yes, and they can also catch me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as well. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
Usman, that's really a very good concluding and wise remark. Appreciate your time. It's been very good to catch up with you after so many years, and also have learned from you about your achievements and how your own experience evolved over the years. It's been tremendous, reconnecting with you and also having this dialogue. Thank you for your time.
My delightful pleasure.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.